Shadows in the snow. Nick stubbed out his sixth cigarette. He leaned against the grimy window frame of his motel room. His tired eyes darted between the snow-dusted entrance to the parking lot and the cracked wristwatch strapped tightly to his left wrist. 5 minutes shy of midnight. Where was she? Kelly could be anywhere. She might be stranded on some back road. She could be lost in the storm or hurt. The realization had hit him hours ago, like a punch to the gut. Splitting up and driving separately was a boneheaded move. It was one of the dumbest ideas he'd ever had. Circumstances hadn't left him much choice back in Dayton. He'd barely had time to fire off a desperate text before everything went sideways. His fingers trembled as he typed. "I've got to get out of this town for good. If you're coming with me, meet me at the diner off Route 59. I'll lay it all out when I see you. I swear. Don't call. My battery's toast." Then he chucked the phone into a dumpster behind a gas station on the edge of town. He watched it sink into a pile of greasy fast food wrappers, crushed beer cans, and soggy cardboard. Its screen went dark forever. By his rough mental math, scratched out in his head between drags of smoke, Kelly should have rolled up to their agreed spot at least 2 hours earlier. Maybe even 3, depending on traffic, road closures, or how bad the snow had gotten. Nick clung to the fragile hope that she'd pulled over somewhere safe. Perhaps she was in a cozy little coffee shop with steamed-up windows and the smell of burnt espresso. Maybe she was in another cheap motel like this one, waiting out the blizzard that was turning the highways into a nightmare. Deep down, his gut churned with a darker, uglier thought. Her car could have veered off the icy asphalt of Route 59. It might have tumbled into a ditch, with wheels spinning uselessly in the snow, and headlights dimming as the engine died. Or perhaps she'd read his cryptic, half-baked message, rolled her eyes in that way she always did when he screwed up, and decided not to bother showing up at all. The cigarette butt sizzled as the ember kissed the filter. It snapped him out of his spiraling thoughts. He flicked it into the overflowing ashtray on the chipped nightstand beside the bed. The faint hiss blended with the low, constant hum of the motel's ancient heater rattling in the corner. He patted his jeans pockets, front, back, even the tiny coin one. Then he scanned the room with a quick, frantic sweep. Bare walls stained yellow from years of smoke greeted him. A sagging bed with a threadbare quilt sat in the center. A flickering lamp cast weak light across the peeling wallpaper. Nothing. Not a single cigarette in sight. He mentally kicked himself for not stocking up when he'd had the chance. He let out a frustrated groan that echoed faintly in the cramped space. Then he snatched his car keys from the dresser where they lay next to a crumpled receipt. He shrugged into his weathered leather jacket. The cold metal of the keys bit into his palm as he gripped them tight. He swung open the door to his room with a creak of rusty hinges and stepped out into the unknown. The chill of the night already seeped through the thin walls. The hallway stank of stale tobacco smoke. A thick, choking haze hung in the air like a ghost. It was dead quiet, with no signs of life stirring behind the flimsy doors. The handful of guests holed up in this Fleabag motel off Route 59 had retreated to their rooms. They were probably snoring away on creaky mattresses that sagged in the middle. Some might be huddled under thin, moth-eaten blankets, trying to warm up with those rattling oil heaters that smelled faintly of burnt dust and gasoline. The storm outside howled like a wounded animal. It rattled the loose window panes and shook the whole building. This made the place feel even more desolate than it already looked under the dim flicker of a single bulb overhead. Why had he picked this dump of a motel in the first place? For one, the room was a steal. It cost practically pocket change, just $10 a night, even for a double with 2 lumpy beds he didn't need. The beds came complete with stained pillows and a faint, musty odor. Also, a joint this sketchy, tucked away in the middle of nowhere between Dayton and Springfield, wasn't the kind of place most folks would choose to crash for the night. It was too grimy, too lonely, too far off the beaten path. That suited him fine. Fewer eyes watched, fewer questions were asked. There were fewer chances of someone recognizing his face from a gas station security cam. Truth was, he hadn't had the luxury of shopping around for a better spot. Time had been a noose tightening around his neck when he'd pulled into the lot. His tires crunched over gravel as snow already piled up around the edges. Nick shoved the thought aside. He let it drift away like the smoke curling from his last cigarette, dissipating into the stale air around him. He trudged down the narrow staircase to the first floor. His boots thudded softly on the worn wooden steps. Each one groaned under his weight. He slipped past the empty front desk. The clerk was nowhere in sight. He was probably napping in some cluttered back room with a space heater. Or maybe he was out braving the storm for a smoke of his own, leaving the desk littered with old coffee cups and a dog-eared magazine. Nick reached the heavy metal door at the entrance. Its paint was chipped and peeling in long, curling strips. He gave it a hard shove. The latch groaned loudly as it swung open. Cold air rushed in to meet him. He'd already clocked it earlier that evening. This was the only way in or out. There were no fire escapes or side exits. Just this one rusty bottleneck of an entrance, framed by cracked concrete. That was a problem. He thought grimly about it as his breath fogged in front of him while he lingered in the doorway. If anyone came looking for him, cops with their flashing lights or someone else with a grudge and a gun, he'd be trapped like a rat in a cage with nowhere to bolt. There was no back door to slip through unnoticed. He stepped outside. A brutal gust of wind slammed into him full force. It carried a frigid blast of air that stung his face like a slap. 100 tiny snowflakes, sharp as needles and cold as ice, peppered his cheeks. They turned them raw and red in seconds. The sensation prickled down to his jaw as he squinted into the dark. The parking lot was a mess. It was buried under a heavy blanket of wet snow that glistened faintly under the motel's flickering neon sign buzzing overhead. Half the letters were burnt out, leaving it to spell MTL in a sad, uneven glow. Besides Nick's beat-up Chevy Nova, a relic from the 70s with chipped green paint, a dented hood, and a cracked taillight, two other vehicles sat like sleeping giants in the drifts. One was a pickup truck, a Ford F-150 by the looks of it. It was so caked in snow, it resembled a shapeless mound more than a car. Its outline barely hinted at its boxy frame under the thick white layer. 3 spaces over, a Dodge Neon with dark-tinted windows crouched low to the ground. It was still spared from the worst of the drift for now, though the snow was creeping up its tires fast. Nick's Nova was a lost cause. It was half swallowed by the storm already. The windshield was a solid sheet of white. The roof sagged under the weight. He figured that was a plus. Buried like that, it'd be tough to spot from the highway. It blended into the whiteout like a ghost car abandoned in the night. He dragged his sleeve across the driver's side door. He brushed off a thick layer of slush that clung stubbornly to the fabric. Then he yanked it open with a loud creak of frozen metal. He slumped into the icy seat and shivered hard. The leather jacket might have looked cool back at the bar in Dayton. However, it was useless against this kind of cold. It let the chill seep straight through to his bones. His breath puffed out in quick, visible clouds. He rummaged around the car. His hands fumbled over the cracked vinyl seats. He dug under a crumpled McDonald's bag and an empty soda can. On the back seat, tucked behind the trash, he struck gold. He found 3 packs of Marlboros, still sealed in their plastic wrap, and 10 packets of instant coffee. It was the cheap kind you mix with hot water and choke down when there's nothing better. It was a smart move to swing by that gas station before he peeled out of town. He thought this with a flicker of pride, cutting through the tangle of nerves, knotting his stomach. Cigarettes, coffee, a rust bucket Chevy that rattled like a tin can, and a ratty old duffel bag stuffed with a few shirts, a toothbrush, and the cash. That's all he had left from the life he'd torched back in Dayton. His fancy smartphone was long gone. He ditched it in a panic behind that gas station on Main Street. He could still picture it sinking into that dumpster. Its sleek black case disappeared under a pile of filth. The screen was dark forever. He was set on starting over somewhere new. He was damn sure of it. With the cash he'd scored, he'd leave the past in the dust. He wouldn't haul it along like some heavy baggage he couldn't shake. A clean slate was what they called it in those cheesy self-help books Kelly used to read. Sure, his might be a little wrinkled. It could be a little stained yellow around the edges from smoke and regret. But it was blank, unmarred by the mess he'd left behind. That's what counted most right now. Nick was halfway out of the freezing Chevy. One leg was already planted on the snowy ground. His breath fogged in the biting air. A flash of orange light cut through the frost-covered windshield like a beacon. Headlights appeared. A car was pulling into the lot. Tires crunched over the fresh powder. The sound was muffled by the howling wind whipping around the motel. His heart leapt into his throat. A spark of hope ignited in his chest. It was warm and fleeting. Finally, Kelly, you made it! He breathed out the words. They escaped in a cloud of white vapor that hung briefly before dissolving into the cold night. But that spark snuffed out fast. It was buried under the wet snowflakes pelting his face. His jacket was now damp and clung uncomfortably to his shoulders. The leather creaked as he moved. He'd been expecting her blue Ford Focus. It was a reliable little car she'd driven since her sophomore year at Ohio State. Its familiar shape was etched into his mind. This wasn't it. Not even close. Instead, a beat-up gray Pontiac Grand Prix rolled in. It was older than Nick by a decade. Its body was pocked with rust along the sills. The front bumper was scratched to hell and hung slightly askew. The rear cargo area was a solid slab of metal. There were no windows, just a blank, uninviting wall of steel that gave it an ominous, boxy look. A guy was definitely driving. Nick could make out a broad silhouette hunched behind the wheel. The man's hands gripped the steering column. The headlights glared too bright. They bounced off the snow, making it impossible to catch his face. There were no passengers as far as he could tell. The tinted glass obscured any chance of a clear view inside the cab. The clunker parked at the far end of the lot. It was tucked into the darkest corner where a busted streetlight flickered uselessly overhead. Its weak beam was swallowed by the storm. Nick didn't wait to see the driver climb out or hear the engine cut off. He turned on his heel. His boots crunched through the snow with a hurried rhythm. He hustled back toward the motel. His breath puffed out in quick, nervous bursts that fogged briefly before vanishing. The wind tugged at his jacket. It flapped the hem against his thighs as he moved. His mind already raced with questions he didn't want to answer. The hallway was still a ghost town when he slipped back inside. The faint buzz of a dying fluorescent light overhead was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. Its hum drilled into his skull. How many people were even staying here tonight? He wondered this while running a mental tally as he caught his breath. There were at least 2, not counting himself. Maybe it was that pickup guy who looked half asleep when he checked in. Perhaps it was the neon owner he hadn't even seen. Now there might be 3 if this Pontiac creep decided to check in and grab a room instead of just passing through. He'd better keep clear of all of them. He decided this as his gut tightened at the thought of unwanted attention, eyes lingering too long, or voices asking questions he couldn't afford to answer were risks he didn't need. Back in his room, Nick tore into a fresh pack of Marlboros. The crinkle of cellophane was loud in the stillness as he ripped it open with shaky fingers. He posted up by the window again. He stared out into the chaotic night beyond the glass. The blizzard was raging now. It was worse than it'd been all evening. A full-on whiteout swallowed everything in its path. Wind screamed through the cracks in the walls. It was strong enough to whip the snow into near-horizontal sheets. At least, that's how it looked under the faint, stuttering glow of the motel's perimeter lights. Their bulbs buzzed faintly against the onslaught. From where he stood, peering through the smudged glass, it almost seemed like the snow blasted out of the streetlights themselves. It was fine and powdery, like those fake snow machines they used at ski resorts up north. Except this was real, relentless, and damn near suffocating. At this rate, his Chevy wouldn't move an inch come morning. There was no shovel to dig it out. He had no brush to clear the windshield. It would be just a snowbound hunk of metal stranded in the lot. That didn't bug him much. His head was too tangled up in other worries. They were darker, heavier ones that made a stuck car seem trivial by comparison. The clock on the nightstand had red digits glowing faintly. It ticked past midnight. It showed 12:01 now. Then 12:02. Kelly still hadn't shown up. There wasn't a sign of her headlights piercing the storm. There was no text he'd never get with his phone rotting in that dumpster back in town. What if they nabbed her? He thought this as dread crept in like ice water down his spine. If they leaned on her or threatened her with jail or worse, she'd crack. She'd tell them exactly where he said to meet and give up this motel in a heartbeat. Then it'd be over. They'd roll up here with sirens blaring and guns drawn. He'd be finished, cuffed or dead with no in-between. He stared into the swirling storm. Nick's mind raced with a mess of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios piling up like the snow outside. The ashtray overflowed with cigarette butts. Each one was crushed out harder than the last. Stubs piled up in a chaotic heap. The room filled with a thick, choking haze of smoke that stung his nose. He'd cracked the window a hair earlier, hoping for some relief. It didn't help. The cold just seeped in, mixing with the heat from the radiator. The vent's pathetic, whining hum couldn't keep up with the cloud he'd created. He slumped back in the rickety chair. Its uneven legs wobbled under his weight. One hand tugged the curtain aside every minute or so to peek out. Cars zipped by on the highway now and then, their headlights cut through the dark like knives. None slowed down or turned toward the motel. Their engines faded into the distance as fast as they came. Each time, the disappointment hit harder. It was a weight pressing on his chest and squeezing the air out of him bit by bit. His eyes stung. Smoke bit at them. Or maybe it was just exhaustion clawing at him after hours on edge. His body begged for rest he couldn't give it. Sleep sounded good, a distant dream of peace. In this mess, with his nerves frayed and his heart pounding, there was no chance of that happening. If he knew where Kelly was right now, he'd burn rubber to get to her. He'd screw the risks and whoever might be watching. He thought this while clenching his fists. But he didn't know. He had no clue where she was. Safe, lost, or gone. That gnawed at him worse than anything. It was a relentless ache he couldn't shake. Cigarettes weren't doing the trick anymore. Their bitter taste turned sour in his mouth. His throat felt like sandpaper from the smoke. It was raw and dry. His water bottle sat empty on the dresser. It mocked him with its uselessness next to a crumpled pack of gum he'd forgotten about. He cursed under his breath. He remembered the cooler in the lobby downstairs. Free water was right there for the taking. He couldn't drag himself from the window. It was irrational and stupid even. Part of him felt like if he left his post and abandoned this vigil, Kelly wouldn't come. It was like his staring out into the storm was the only thing keeping the possibility alive. It tethered her to him across the miles. He told himself to chill out while rubbing his temples. She wasn't dumb. She was smarter than that. Smarter than him, for sure. He should have handled it better. He berated himself as the regret grew sharp and biting. It shouldn't have been some vague, panicked text. She hadn't answered when he called earlier. Her voicemail kicked in after 3 rings. He could have swung by her dorm at Ohio State and caught her between classes. He was too rushed to run and too scared of getting nabbed on the way with that cash burning a hole in his bag. He was the dumb one here, not her. Who'd chase after a guy who sent a text like that, sounding like a lunatic? She probably thought he'd knocked over a liquor store or shanked somebody in an alley. Maybe it was both. Truth was, he hadn't done anything illegal. Not exactly, not in the eyes of the law at first. The money just showed up in his account one day. It was a fat, beautiful mistake, a payroll glitch from his dead-end warehouse job. All he did was cash it out fast and hit the road before anyone noticed. Then something snagged his attention outside. It pulled him out of his head. A figure in a long black coat appeared. The hood was pulled tight against the wind. He stepped into the parking lot. His boots sank into the snow. The guy trudged from the motel's entrance down a narrow, packed snow path to the lot. His shoulders were hunched against the storm. He climbed into the Pontiac Grand Prix and shut the door with a dull thud that barely carried over the wind. Nick mused while watching from behind the curtain. He guessed the guy wasn't staying in this dump after all. His breath fogged the glass. It was a smart move. He was the only fool dumb enough to hole up here for the night. But the man didn't drive off like Nick expected. The Grand Prix's engine sputtered to life. A low, uneven rumble cut through the blizzard. The alternator belt whined faintly like a dying animal. You could hear the interior heaters struggling. A faint hum seeped out into the night air. They warmed the cab against the biting cold outside. Nick thought it wasn't that cold out to warm it up this long. He frowned as he tapped a fresh cigarette against the pack. It was 10 below, maybe. That was nothing a quick start wouldn't fix. What was he up to? 20 or 30 minutes passed. The Pontiac sat there idling. Exhaust puffed out in thin white clouds that mingled with the falling snow. Then the engine cut out abruptly. The silence rushed back in. The driver stepped out and locked the door with a jingle of keys. He headed back inside the motel. His boots crunched steadily through the drifts. It was no big deal, right? Nick thought this while trying to convince himself as he lit the cigarette. The flame flickered in his shaky hand. He was just warming his car and keeping the frost off the windshield or something. But an hour later, it happened again. It was the same routine with the same timing, like clockwork. By then, Nick had dozed off in the chair. His head lolled against the backrest. The cigarette burned down to a stub between his fingers. He even dreamed for a fleeting moment. A blue Ford Focus, Kelly's car, a gift from her folks for her 21st birthday, rolled into the motel lot. Tires crunched snow. Headlights cut through the dark. Nick leapt from his chair with his heart racing. He was ready to sprint out and meet her. Her name was already on his lips. Then he woke up. The dream shattered like glass. The engine's whistling yanked him awake. It was sharp and piercing through the cracked window. The Pontiac guy was at it again. The engine rumbled, Keeter's word. It was the same deal. Another 30 minutes passed. Then he went back to his room. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly down the hall. A door slammed shut somewhere in the distance. Why did he keep starting the car like that? Nick wondered this while rubbing sleep from his eyes. The cigarette stub was cold in his hand. It was only 10 below outside. It wasn't like the dead of winter in Minnesota or something. Was it a pet? Maybe a dog or cat was stuck in there? He could bring it inside. He doubted this place had rules against fur on the furniture. Something else was off, though. His gut whispered this as a nagging feeling he couldn't shake. Now his focus locked onto that dirty gray Pontiac Grand Prix from '89. Its rusty frame squatted in the lot like a predator waiting for prey. It was better than obsessing over Kelly. He told himself this while taking a long drag. The smoke curried up toward the ceiling. She wasn't coming. He was done hoping. His eyelids grew heavy. They drooped with every blink. Keeping them open was a battle. Exhaustion tugged at him like a weight tied to his bones. It dragged him down into the dark. Nick decided to make coffee. It was something to shake off the fog creeping into his head. That meant hitting the front desk downstairs. He'd be showing his face again and risking someone clocking him in the dim light of the lobby. He thought he'd screw it. He pushed himself up from the chair with a groan. The wood creaked under him. He'd risk turning himself in to the cops for a cup of something hot. Hell, he'd confess everything if it came with cream and sugar. It was a good thing it was just a trip down the hall for water, not a full-on surrender. He grabbed the cheap plastic kettle from the corner of the room. Its cord dangled like a limp snake. He shuffled to the door. He pressed his ear to the thin wood. He listened hard and held his breath. It seemed quiet out there. There were no footsteps or voices, just the faint howl of the wind outside. He convinced himself it was safe, or at least safe enough. He eased the lock open with a soft click. His heart thudded a little faster than he'd like. He muttered under his breath to relax. He was just getting water. Why was he so paranoid about this? Still, he stepped lighter than usual. His boots barely brushed the floor. He avoided the creaky floorboards he'd mapped out earlier in the night. Each step was deliberate and silent. It was like he was sneaking through some enemy territory instead of a rundown motel in the middle of Ohio. The cooler's thin trickle filled his kettle for 5 agonizing minutes. The water gurgled softly as it splashed against the plastic. Every second he strained to catch any sound, a door opening, a cough, anything. He prayed it wasn't footsteps creeping up behind him. The second floor creaked faintly now and then. Old wood settled under the storm's pressure. Each time, his pulse spiked. His imagination ran wild. He felt someone lurking, a shadow just out of sight, ready to pounce. He glanced back over his shoulder. There was nothing but an empty hallway. The dim light flickered overhead. He was back in the room. He bolted the door behind him and set the kettle on the dresser. He returned to the window and peered out into the storm again. He plugged in the kettle and watched it hiss as the water boiled. The steam rose in lazy curls. Cigarettes burned one after another. The ashtray became a graveyard of stubs. The air grew thicker with smoke. Then a lock clicked in the hallway. It was sharp and sudden. It cut through the quiet like a gunshot. Cautious footsteps followed. They were slow and deliberate. The sound bounced off the thin walls. To Nick's surprise and growing dread, they slowly approached his door. Each step was louder and closer, until they stopped right outside. For a split second, he stopped breathing. He did anything to stay silent and not give himself away. His lungs burned as he held it in. His heart pounded like a jackhammer. It was so loud, he swore it had burst out of his chest and rattle the walls. It might betray him to whoever was out there. Someone stood outside his door. He could feel it. The presence was heavy and real, separated only by a flimsy slab of wood and a cheap lock. Nick pictured cops busting in. He imagined a SWAT team in black gear, with flashlights blinding him as they shouted orders. Cuffs would snap onto his wrists before he could blink. Or it could be worse. Someone quieter and deadlier with no badge to flash. He cursed himself as an idiot. His eyes darted around the room for an escape that didn't exist. He should have kept running and not stopped here like a sitting duck. Waiting around for her was foolish. What was he thinking? Wasting time like this meant he blew his shot to get out clean. But then the footsteps retreated. They were soft at first, then faded fast. The metal front door clanged shut downstairs. A hollow echo rang through the motel. Nick recovered from the sudden panic. His chest heaved. Whoever it was stepped outside into the storm. He realized it was the Pontiac guy. He peered through a slit in the curtain. The hood was up. The man waded through snowdrifts back to his rust bucket. His coat flapped in the wind. His figure was hunched against the cold. Nick stubbed out his cigarette in the ashtray. He ground it down hard and ducked fully behind the curtain. He stayed out of sight. His breath was shallow and quick. He thought the guy would climb in again with the same old song and dance. He waited for the engine to rumble. But this time, the man didn't head for the driver's side like before. He went straight to the cargo hatch at the back. His gloved hands fumbled with the latch. He looked around, slow and deliberate. He scanned the lot and then peered up at the motel windows. His head tilted like he was searching for something or someone. Nick pressed himself flat against the wall beside the window. He was unseen. His pulse raced as he held his breath again. The guy was satisfied. He popped the hatch with a creak of metal and rummaged inside. His movements were quick but careful, like he didn't want to be caught. Nick wondered about the interior. What was he digging for? Tools or a bag? Nick expected anything except what he saw next. It made his stomach drop like a stone. A kid climbed out of the car. He was small and shaky. He stepped into the snow under the faint glow of the busted streetlight. Nick judged by the clothes, a bulky jacket and jeans, that it was a boy. He was maybe 10 or 11, hard to tell in the dim light. His hands were tied tight with rope. His wrists were bound in front of him. The knots were rough and sloppy. His eyes were wrapped in something dark, perhaps a scarf or a strip of cloth. It blinded him as he stumbled forward. The man grabbed the kid by the collar of his jacket. He was rough and impatient. He dragged him along through the snow. He glanced side to side like a hunted animal. His head swiveled to check every shadow. Nick thought, "Holy hell." His heart thumped loud enough to drown out the wind. It threatened to break free of his ribcage and crash through the wall. Why did he keep a kid in the car like that? Was he warming it up while hiding out in his room all cozy? Why did he drag him out now, in the dead of night? What was he planning to do with him? Something bad or something twisted? He wanted to bolt downstairs to the desk and find a phone, any phone to call the cops. He needed to get someone out here fast, but he stopped himself cold mid-step. His hand hovered over the doorknob. He knew it'd be a dumb move that'd screw him just as much as the kid. He reasoned that calling the police meant he'd have to split right after. He might already be wanted. Cops could be circulating his name and face from that grainy gas station footage by now. He wasn't leaving yet. He still clung to this stupid hope Kelly would show up against all odds. But the kid's fate gnawed at him most. It was a sharp, relentless ache that wouldn't let go. It twisted his insides into knots. What if he was some sicko or predator? Was he doing whatever to that boy in there? Or something worse that Nick couldn't even think about without feeling sick? He thought he shouldn't have stopped here. Regret was bitter on his tongue. Maybe he should ditch everything. Kelly, the cash, this whole mess, and run. He could get the hell out before it was too late. He decided that was it. Resolve hardened, he started pacing the room frantically. His boots scuffed the worn carpet. Cigarettes, he grabbed the last pack from the dresser. Car keys, he snatched them from where he'd tossed them. Jacket, it was already on, damp and cold. What else? Bag. Where was the damn bag? He found it where he'd stashed it. It was shoved under the bed, half hidden by the sagging frame. He unzipped it with a quick jerk and checked inside. The stuff was still there. Clothes, toothbrush, and the cash, all safe in its crumpled envelope. Another flicker of hope sparked. It was faint, but stubborn. He could call the cops anonymously, tip them off about this creep, then bolt before they showed. It was the right thing to do. He'd let them sort it out and clean up the mess he'd stumbled into. He dashed out of the motel room. The door banged shut behind him. He headed for the lot. His boots slipped on the icy steps. He thought about warming the Chevy first and getting the engine running. There wasn't time. Not with that kid out there. Nick slogged through the snow to his Chevy. The drifts swallowed his boots up to the ankles. His head buzzed with a swarm of thoughts. It was a hurricane of bees rattling around in his skull, loud and chaotic. The kid was tied up in the trunk like some kind of prisoner. That guy was hiding something ugly. He waited till everyone was asleep to move him. He dragged him out now when the motel was dead quiet. It was weird as hell and wrong. But he second-guessed himself. What if it wasn't what it looked like? He paused with his hand on the car door. What if he was jumping the gun and just screwed it all up for no reason? He might make it worse. He remembered a time as a kid, maybe 12. He told his mom about seeing Dad with another woman while out biking with a friend. It was some lady in a red coat laughing with him outside a diner. Mom freaked out and cried for days. She fought with Dad over it. It turned out she was just a coworker from the factory helping him with a flat tire. Nick had felt like an idiot then. He'd stirred up trouble over nothing. Nick usually saw himself as decisive. He was quick to act when it mattered. He had to be. When your boss accidentally dumped a fat paycheck into your account, 5 figures instead of 4, you didn't sit around asking questions. You figured it out fast and cashed it out at the bank before they caught the glitch. You skipped town straight from work and ditched everything. Your apartment, your buddies, your whole damn life. Not everyone had the guts for that kind of move. Nick did, or he thought he did. But now, he couldn't decide anything. He was stuck in a loop of doubt and fear that pinned him in place. He didn't want to leave, peel out of this lot, and vanish into the night. He didn't want to stay and dig deeper into this creepy guest with his rusty Pontiac and late-night habits. So he sat in the cold car. His breath fogged the windshield in quick bursts. The icy seat creaked under him as he shifted. His hands gripped the steering wheel just to feel something solid. Finally, it clicked. He knew how to play this. A plan formed through the haze of panic and caffeine withdrawal. He'd check it out himself and scope the situation. He'd figure out what was really going on before he did anything rash, like calling the cops and painting a target on his own back. He could slip downstairs and poke around. He might hear something through the walls. If it was bad, he'd act. If not, he'd back off with no harm done. That was the move. He nodded to himself. The decision settled his nerves just enough to keep going. There was no one at the front desk when he got there. Just an empty chair sat behind the counter. A flickering desk lamp cast long shadows across the peeling linoleum floor. The bell to call the clerk was there, a tarnished little thing. It probably didn't work. He pressed it 3 times with his thumb. It gave him nothing but silence, not even a faint ding. There was no phone in sight either, just a stack of yellowed motel flyers and a half-empty coffee mug with a lipstick stain on the rim greeted him. But he spotted spare room keys hanging on a pegboard behind the desk. They glinted faintly in the dim light. 5 through 9, each with a faded plastic tag. He grabbed them all and slipped them into his jacket pocket with a soft clink. It was just in case. He wasn't sure what "in case" even meant yet. Nick crept down the hall like Sam Fisher from his favorite stealth game back in high school, Splinter Cell. He remembered all those nights sneaking around virtual bases. He took quick steps, heel first, then the rest of the foot. He was as silent as he could manage on the creaky old floorboards. It was quieter that way. He figured this as his breath stayed shallow. Every muscle was tense as he moved. He passed his room, number 4. The door was still shut tight. He kept going to the end of the corridor. The air grew colder the farther he got from the lobby's weak heat. He froze in place and listened hard, his ears strained for any hint of sound beyond the wind rattling the windows. There were no voices drifting through the walls. There was no rustling of sheets or footsteps. There were no creaks from shifting weight. It was nothing at all. Or maybe it was something faint and fleeting. It caught his attention like a whisper in the dark. He pressed his ear to door 8. The wood was cold against his skin. He held his breath again. There was nothing but silence. It was thick and heavy, pressing back at him. It was the same with 9. It was dead quiet, with not even the hum of a heater or the drip of a faucet. Door 7, though, was different. Yes, there it was. It was something real this time, faint but unmistakable. He heard barely audible sobs. They were soft and broken, punctuated by a sniffle. It was the sound of someone trying to stay quiet and failing. He thought it was here. His stomach twisted. That was the room. The kid was in there. Now what? Did he bust in yelling with fists up, no plan and no weapon? That'd just make it worse for him and the kid both. He'd end up dead or caught. The boy'd be no better off. He told himself he had to be smart about this. He stepped back. His mind raced for a better play. What if he was wrong? What if there was no crime here, just some weird misunderstanding he was blowing out of proportion? There'd be no drastic moves yet, not till he knew more and had something solid to go on. His windows didn't face the lot. That was good. It meant he wouldn't see Nick coming. He reasoned this while glancing back toward the stairs. It was the 2nd floor, though. That was bad. There was no quick way out if it went south. There was only one shot at this then. He'd play dumb and act like nothing was up. He'd get him to let his guard down. Nick raised a fist. He hesitated for a split second as his pulse thundered in his ears. Then he tapped lightly on the door. 3 soft knocks echoed louder than he'd meant in the silent hall. Something clattered inside. It was a chair scraping, maybe, or something dropped in a hurry. Then there was a thud, heavy and dull. It was followed by muffled words too garbled to make out through the door. Nick thought, God, what do I even say? Panic clawed at his throat. His mind blanked out as he stood there. His heart raced with nerves. It hammered against his ribs like it wanted out. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cold seeping through the walls. The lock scraped. Metal ground on metal. The door cracked open a few inches. It was just enough for a dark-eyed man with rough, weathered skin to peek out. His voice came low and gruff. It was muffled like he was speaking through a scarf or a mask. Suspicion dripped from every word. "Who are you? What do you want, huh?" Nick stammered, "Good evening." He forced the words out. His tongue tripped over itself. "Sorry if I woke you up or anything. I was backing up in the lot just now. The damn snow's making it hard to see. I accidentally clipped someone's car out there. I asked at the desk downstairs. They said it's yours. It's a Pontiac, gray, kind of beat up. It looks like the trunk door's smashed pretty bad. Or maybe it was already like that before? I couldn't tell in the dark." His nonsense felt flimsy as hell. It was a paper-thin lie that collapsed under any real scrutiny. He could hear it in his own shaky voice. He thought the guy would pull a knife now. His imagination ran wild. Or it'd be worse. A gun to blow his head off right here in the hall. He was toast, done for. But the guy just frowned. His brow creased under the shadow of his hood. His eyes narrowed as he processed the story. He muttered, "Mine was fine last I checked." His tone was skeptical, but not outright hostile. Not yet. Nick wondered if it worked. A flicker of relief mixed with the fear. He'd lured him out and got him talking. Now, what did he do next? Nick hadn't planned that far. He hadn't thought past the first step of this half-baked scheme. It was time to wing it and improvise on the fly, like he'd done 100 times before. The man was shorter than Nick by a good 6 inches. He was a bit stocky under his coat. His frame was solid but not imposing. He stepped out fully. His hood was still up and pulled low to hide his face. He slammed the door behind him with a bang that made Nick flinch. He marched off toward the stairs. His pace was quick and determined. He was a yard ahead of Nick, leading the way. His boots thudded on the floorboards. Only now did Nick notice the guy limped slightly on his left leg. It was a faint hitch in his step, subtle, but there, like an old injury flaring up in the cold. An idea sparked in Nick's head. It was reckless and wild, born from desperation and too many cigarettes. It was viciously opportune and maybe stupid as hell. But it might just work and give him the edge he needed. Or it might not. He'd be screwed 6 ways to Sunday. The moment the hooded guy stepped 1 foot past the front door's threshold and planted it on the icy concrete outside, Nick lunged forward. He shoved him hard in the back. He put every ounce of strength into it. His shoulders burned with the effort. It paid off big time. The man stumbled. His arms flailed for balance. Then he face-planted into the snow with a muffled grunt. His coat billowed out around him as he hit the ground hard. Nick didn't stick around to watch him scramble up or curse into the drifts. What was done was done. He had seconds to move. He slammed the metal door shut with a clang and locked it from inside. He twisted the deadbolt with a satisfying click. His hands trembled from adrenaline. He thought it wouldn't hold him long. A guy like that would kick it down or find a way back in soon. But it bought him time, a few precious minutes. He raced back upstairs to room 7. His legs pumped. His breath was ragged in his throat. It was fast enough to bang on every door he passed. 5, 6, 8, 9. He used hard knocks with his fist to stir trouble. He hoped someone, anyone, would poke their head out and see what was happening. Then he unlocked 7 with the stolen key. His fingers fumbled for a second before it turned. He burst into the room and locked it behind him. He shoved the key back into the hole to jam it from the inside. The kid lay on the floor in the middle of the room. He was sprawled out, like a broken doll. He was shirtless. His thin chest was exposed to the cold air. His skin was pale and clammy, under the dim light of a bare bulb overhead. His arms were roped apart and spread eagle. They were tied to the bedposts with thick, coarse knots that bit into his wrists. Red marks already formed. He was 10 years old, maybe a bit more, 12 at most. It was hard to tell with his face half hidden by the mess of dark hair plastered to his forehead. A crude word, maybe a name or something worse, was carved into his chest with shallow, jagged cuts. The blood had dried to a dark crust. His mouth was gagged with a dirty rag. It was held in place by duct tape wrapped tight around his head. It muffled any sound he might have made. His eyes were blindfolded with a thick black cloth. It was knotted sloppily at the back, keeping him in the dark. Nick said softly, "Hey, kid." His voice shook as he crouched beside him. "I'm here to help you. Don't scream, okay? Just stay calm. I've got you." He stepped closer. He was careful not to spook him. He pulled the blindfold off with a gentle tug and let it fall to the floor. The boy's eyes were open. They were wide and glassy, but glazed over. It was like he was out of it, staring through Nick instead of at him, lost in some drugged-up haze. Nick thought he was drugged, probably something strong. His jaw tightened as he took it in. The air stank of something sweet and sour at once. It was a cloying chemical smell that hung heavy in the room. It stung his nose and made his head swim. Nick lunged for the ropes binding the kid's arms. His fingers clawed at the knots in a frantic rush to get him free. The knots were tight, expert level. They were tied by someone who knew what they were doing, the kind of work you'd see on a boat or in a survival manual. There was no untying those easily, not with his shaking hands and no time to waste. He scrambled to his feet and scanned the room. Bare walls, a sagging mattress, and a small table in the corner greeted him. He yanked open a drawer of kitchen stuff. A fork, a spoon, and there, a knife. It was dull as hell. The blade was nicked and unsharpened since the day it was bought. But it was better than nothing. Better than bare hands against rope that thick. He saw it through the cords. The blade caught and slipped at first, then finally cut. Fibers frayed until the kid's arms fell limp to the floor. Once he was loose, a woman's scream pierced the hall outside. It was high-pitched, raw, and full of terror. It froze Nick in place for a split second. A minute later, someone pounded on the door. Fists hammered the wood so hard it shook in the frame. The sound reverberated through the tiny room. That familiar male voice roared through. It was thick with anger and desperation. "What are you doing in there? Open the damn door right now! He's sick! He needs treatment, you idiot! Don't untie his eyes! Do you hear me? Don't you dare!" The lock rattled. The key he'd left in it scraped as someone tried to force it from the other side. One thought hammered in Nick's head. It was relentless and drowned out everything else. He thought he was dead tonight. Right here. This shitty night, he wasn't walking out of this alive. He darted to the window to check the scene and see if there was a way out. A ledge, anything. He cracked it open and peered down into the swirling snow. The drop to the parking lot looked a hell of a lot farther than 2 stories should. It was too late to jump and too late to run. Behind him, wood splintered with a sickening crunch. The door buckled under a heavy blow. Someone was kicking it, maybe, or ramming it with a shoulder. The last thing Nick saw and heard was a black telescopic baton in the guy's hands. It was gripped tight. Its sleek metal caught the light as he swung. The whistle of it sliced the air. It was fast and sharp, aimed straight for him. He didn't feel the blow to his neck. He didn't have time to register the pain or brace himself. He was out cold instantly. The world blinked to black as he crumpled to the floor beside the kid. Nick came to a couple minutes later. His head swam. The room tilted around him like a ship in a storm. His skull was splitting. A throbbing ache radiated from the base of his neck. Every pulse was a hammer blow against his temples. His neck screamed with pain. It was stiff and raw where the baton had connected. Each breath sent a jolt down his spine. Nausea rose fast. Bile burned the back of his throat. It threatened to spill over as he fought to keep it down. Through blurry, unfocused eyes, he made out the man's shape across the room. He moved quickly, hacking stuff into a duffel bag in a hurry. He tossed in clothes, a flashlight, and a roll of duct tape. His hands were steady, despite the chaos. The guy snapped. "Awake already? Too late, damn you!" He glanced over his shoulder. His voice was sharp with frustration. "I gave up trying to stop you. It's too much trouble. What were you gonna do with the kid, huh? Snatch him and run? Do you even get what you almost caused by sticking your nose in?" Nick cut in. "What you caused!" His voice was raspy and weak. He forced the words out through the pain. "With the kid, tying him up and cutting him. Do you know what he did to deserve that? What's wrong with him that you've got him like this? If he's not treated soon, something awful's gonna happen." "Those are your words, not mine." Nick shot back. "You're nuts." He propped himself up on one elbow. The room spun less now. What kind of sickness needs a kid tied up with ropes and carved up like some animal? Why torture him in a dump like this? Only now he realized they were alone in the room. The kid was gone, with no sign of him on the floor or anywhere else. He thought the kid was probably back in the car, locked in that damn trunk again. Dread sank in deeper. The man shook his head. He sneered under his hood. His lips curled into a twisted grin that didn't reach his cold eyes. He said, "He's real. More real than you'll ever know. You won't believe me, and I don't care. There's no point proving it to a corpse walking. Tell me this instead. Why'd you stick your nose in my business, huh? What's it to you?" He went on. "I'm saying your meddling got innocents killed because of you." He zipped the bag shut with a jerk. "A guy shacked up with his girl down the hall. I heard him laughing earlier. The poor desk clerk didn't sign up for this. They're extra witnesses I don't need cluttering things up. Do you get it? I didn't want to kill anyone tonight. You forced my hand and made it messy." He added, "But you? I won't kill you, not yet." He turned fully to face Nick now. His voice dropped low. He continued, "I already called the cops. An anonymous tip from a payphone down the road. They'll pin the murders on you without blinking. You're a stranger in a motel, a perfect scapegoat." He said, "For now, rest up." The man pulled the baton from his coat pocket again. It was the same one that had knocked Nick out. He stepped behind him. He moved fast and silent as a shadow. He looped it around Nick's throat in one smooth motion. The cold metal pressed hard against his windpipe. It cut off his air before he could react. Sharp pain crushed his windpipe instantly. It was a vice tightening around his neck and choking off his breath with brutal force. Seconds later, his ears rang. A high-pitched whine drowned out the room. The world shrank to that single sound. Words stopped reaching Nick. They tumbled from the guy's mouth, but lost all meaning. They were garbled noise fading into the background as his vision blurred at the edges. Consciousness slipped away slowly. It was a tide pulling him under. His body grew heavy and limp against the floor. One thing he still knew cut through the fog. One clear thought persisted. It was inside his jacket pocket, his salvation, if he could just get to it. He thought to reach it just a bit more. His fingers twitched and inched toward the lump in his coat. Every move was a fight against the darkness closing in. His lifeline was that dull kitchen knife. It was still tucked in the inner pocket from when he'd cut the kid free. The one that barely sliced through ropes earlier had a chipped and useless edge until now, when it mattered most. Now it sliced the guy's arm like apple skin. It was a quick, desperate slash as Nick twisted. The blade caught flesh and drew a hiss of pain. The baton dropped with a clatter. It hit the floor beside him. The pressure on his throat vanished as fast as it come. Air rushed into Nick's lungs with a ragged wheeze. It burned as it filled him. His chest heaved as he gasped and coughed. He fought to stay awake. He lurched forward and twisted free of the guy's grip. Adrenaline surged. He jammed the knife into the man's left thigh, hard and deep. The blade sank in with a wet sound. He yanked it out with a savage pull. Blood spurted. He gripped the handle for dear life as he stumbled back. His hands were slick with sweat and red. He sprang to his feet. He was shaky but upright. His legs trembled under him. He held the blade out in front. He pointed it at the guy. His arm was unsteady but ready. It was a makeshift shield between them. Nick was no fighter. He'd barely scrapped a couple times in school. They were clumsy fistfights over nothing that ended in bloody noses and bruised egos. Adrenaline fogged his brain now. It was a roaring buzz that drowned out reason. It turned the world sharp and loud. All he saw was red pooling on the guy's pants. It spread fast from the thigh wound and soaked through the fabric in a dark, uneven stain. The man roared like a wounded bear and charged. His gloved hands clamped Nick's throat in a vice. The black leather was cold against his skin. He squeezed with everything he had left. He pinned him to the floor with a thud. Nick's back slammed into the carpet. The knife slipped in his grip for a terrifying second. Stabbing a gut wasn't easy. It wasn't like the movies, not clean or quick. It took Nick a few tries. They were wild thrusts that glanced off at first. Then the blade sank deep into flesh and pierced through muscle with a sickening give. The guy grunted in pain. It was a guttural sound. He squeezed Nick's neck harder. His fingers dug in and cut off his air again. But his strength bled out with the blood. It poured from the wounds. His grip weakened by the second and slipped as his body faltered. There was one more stab to the gut, wild and messy. Warm, thick liquid splashed Nick's hand. It coated his fingers and dripped onto the floor. He stopped there, panting. His chest heaved. He was too spent to keep going. He crawled out from under the heavy body and shoved it aside. The guy's weight slumped to the carpet with a dull thump. The man was alive, but barely. His breaths were shallow and ragged. His eyes were half open, but unfocused. He was harmless now, bleeding out in a growing red puddle that soaked into the cheap motel rug. Nick snatched the Pontiac keys from a shelf by the door. They were tossed there carelessly, next to a crumpled pack of smokes. He bolted from the room. The knife was still clutched in his blood-slick hand. It dripped as he ran. In the hall, a young guy in boxers lay dead. He was sprawled across the floor. His body was twisted at an odd angle. A knife handle, a kitchen blade like Nick's, jutted from his temple. Blood pooled under his head and matted his hair to the wood. His room door hung open. It swayed slightly in the draft from a cracked window inside. A girl sprawled on the bed. She was dead too. Her eyes were wide and blank, staring at the ceiling. A pillow was pressed over her face. Her arms were limp at her sides. Nick didn't look close enough to see how she died. It might have been suffocation or worse. He didn't want to know, and didn't have time to process it. He just wanted out of this cursed motel. He needed to get away from the blood and the bodies. The air was thick with death and that sweet sour stench. He ran to the Pontiac. His boots slipped on snow. One thought looped in his head. It was relentless and loud. He thought it was his fault. They were all dead because he couldn't leave it alone. The kid was in the trunk. His eyes were tied again with that dark cloth. His hands and feet were zip-tied now, tighter than the ropes. The plastic cut into his skin. Coffee cups, candy wrappers, and trash littered the car's interior. There were Burger King bags, Snickers peels, and a half-empty Coke can rolling around. It was proof the guy'd been living in this thing for days. That sweet sour stench hit harder here. It was sharp and chemical, like rotting fruit mixed with gasoline. It made Nick gag as he leaned in. He sliced the blindfold off with the knife. He was careful not to nick the kid. He let it fall into the snow-dusted trunk. The boy snapped to. His eyes cleared fast. He instantly sensed Nick wasn't the bad guy. His gaze was sharp and wary, but not afraid. He asked, "Where's Uncle Bob?" His voice was small, but steady. It cut through the wind as he glanced toward the motel. Nick said, "Back inside." He hesitated and wiped the bloody knife on his jeans. "Did he hurt you bad?" The kid nodded. It was slow and deliberate. His expression was blank. Then he said, "He hurt everyone, everybody he could. He killed my mom and dad right in front of me. He made me watch it happen and held my head so I couldn't look away. He took me with him after. He hurt me all the time and barely fed me. Just scraps when he remembered." His voice was calm and flat. It was like recounting a day at school, with no tears or tremor, just cold facts delivered in a monotone. Nick figured it was stress and shook his head. The kid had been through hell. It was enough to break anyone, let alone someone that young. Nick pulled the kid from the trunk. His arms trembled from exhaustion as he lifted him out. He was careful not to jostle him too much. He carried him to the Chevy through the snow. His boots sank deep with every step. He set him gently on the back seat. The cracked vinyl creaked under the boy's slight weight. He brushed snow off his jacket as he settled him in. He cut the zip ties with the knife. He sliced through the plastic with quick, uneven strokes. He freed his hands and feet and then buckled him in tight with the seatbelt. He double-checked it clicked. He draped his own leather jacket over the kid's shoulders. It was damp and cold, but better than nothing against the chill seeping into the car. He started the engine. The Chevy coughed to life with a reluctant sputter. He brushed snow off the windshield with bare hands. The ice bit his skin as he cleared a patchy view. He checked his stuff in the front seat. The duffel with the cash was still there, shoved under the passenger side, untouched and heavy with promise. That was what mattered most. It was his ticket out and his lifeline to whatever came next. With some wheel spin, the car rolled out of the lot. Tires slipped before catching traction. They kicked up snow as he pulled away. He found a rutted path carved by other cars and crawled toward the nearest town. It was back toward Dayton, the only place he knew well enough to navigate in this mess. He thought he'd hand the kid off to someone safe. Not cops. Not now. Now he wasn't just a thief who cashed out a glitch. He'd stabbed a guy and maybe killed him. 3 died because of him, because he stirred the pot. He wondered what he'd become. The question was bitter in his mind. He was a thief, a killer, and a fugitive on the run. He was everything he swore he'd never turn into. He asked, "Where are you from?" He glanced in the rearview mirror at the kid's pale face. He shook off the dark thoughts, threatening to swallow him whole. The boy said quietly, "Springfield." He stared out the window at the snow. "I'm from Dayton," Nick pressed. "Got family anywhere?" He kept his voice steady and casual, like they were just chatting on a normal night. He replied, "Mom and Dad are dead now. Uncle too." Nick asked, "So no one left? Grandparents or anybody?" He said, "Nope, not a soul." Nick muttered, "Rough deal." He chewed his lip. "Guess I'll take you to a hospital then. I'll get you checked out, fed, and somewhere warm." Nick asked, "Why'd your uncle do it, all that stuff?" The kid said, "He lost it and went crazy." He shrugged faintly under the jacket. His tone was still eerily calm. He added sharper now, "No hospital. I hate him. I hate the smell, the needles, all of it." Nick offered, "Want to hear a confession? Something real?" He glanced back again. He tried to keep him talking and keep him grounded. The kid asked, "What?" Nick said, "I don't have parents either, not anymore. I had foster folks at the home back in Dayton, but I killed them. They pissed me off bad. They beat me, locked me up, and treated me like trash. So I ended it." After those words, the engine roared. It was like Nick floored it out of nowhere. The sound was sudden and violent. It cut through the quiet night. The tachometer spiked hard. The needle jumped as the RPMs climbed fast. The car lurched forward in the snow. Wheels slipped in the ruts. They spun uselessly for a second before biting. The Chevy jolted ahead with a shudder. The car picked up speed. It was faster than Nick meant. The road blurred under the dim headlights. The steering wheel ignored Nick's hands. It locked up and stayed stiff. It refused to turn, no matter how hard he yanked it. He stomped the brake. It was stuck. The pedal was frozen solid under his foot, with no give at all. Other pedals were frozen too. Gas, clutch, all useless. They were welded to the floor like they'd been bolted down. He couldn't shift gears. The stick was jammed tight. The car decided its own path now. The kid went on. "I killed him." His voice was steady, almost cheerful, like he was proud of it. "Lots of others too. People who got in my way and people who didn't even matter." Then that creep showed up out of nowhere. He caught me off guard one night and stuffed me in his trunk like a sack. He kept yapping about exorcising devils and curing some disease he thought I had. He tied my eyes every chance he got. I'm powerless without him. I can't do what I do. It's a good thing you got rid of him for me. You slashed him up nice. My power's back now, all mine again." Headlights died abruptly. They flickered out and plunged the car into pitch black. The road vanished ahead. Nick shouted, "What's happening?" Panic surged in him, sharp and cold. His voice cracked as he shouted over the engine's growl. "Why can't I control the damn car?" The kid said simply, "'Cause I'm controlling it." A faint smile was in his tone, calm as ever. Nick snapped, "You didn't answer my question earlier." His hands wrestled the wheel. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. The boy replied, "Fine, I'll bite." He leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped lower. "I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request." The speedometer passed 120. The needle climbed fast and trembled as the car pushed its limits. Wheels skidded on fresh, loose snow. They lost grip. The Chevy fishtailed wildly across the rutted path. The car swerved. It careened, left, then right. Nick's stomach lurched with every jolt. The world was a blur outside. Sweaty palms gripped the wheel. His knuckles were white. He tried to turn it and force it back under control. It wouldn't budge, locked by some force he couldn't see. Nick saw yellow lights ahead. They were two tiny dots, growing fast in the dark. Headlights of another car. They rushed closer every second, unavoidable now. It hit him with a sick, sinking certainty. He was in the oncoming lane. He barreled, straight toward them, with no way out. At the last second, the wheel gave. It was just a fraction, enough to move under his hands after all that fighting. Nick jerked it hard right. His muscles strained. It was a desperate twist to dodge the collision screaming toward him. The car spun out. Tires screeched on the icy road. The world tilted as it whipped around in a violent arc. Snow sprayed in all directions. A deafening crash shattered the quiet of the empty highway. It was metal on metal, a brutal sound that echoed into the night like a gunshot. Then came the lurch and groan of crumpling steel. The screech of tires lost their last grip. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. The collision flung the cars apart. They were two broken hulks torn from each other in an instant. They spun away across the snow-slick asphalt. The Chevy Nova's side took the hit. It was smashed in. The frame buckled. Metal ripped apart like wet cardboard. The car was torn in two jagged halves that skidded to a stop yards apart. No one inside could have survived that. Flesh and bone didn't stand a chance against steel folding like an accordion at that speed. The other car, a blue Ford Focus, Kelly's car, slammed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch. The front crumpled. The side caved in. It was reduced to twisted scrap pinned against the barrier. The young woman driving, Kelly, had dark hair matted with blood. She died on impact. Her body was limp against the deployed airbag. The wheel was crushed into her chest, with no pulse left to find. The first witness was a man about 40 in a beat-up pickup truck. He stopped at the wreck a few minutes later. He pulled over with his hazards flashing. His breath fogged as he stepped out into the cold. He found, amid the mangled steel and shattered glass strewn across the highway, the kid. He was alone and untouched. He sat on the roadside in the snow with not a scratch on him. Nick's jacket was still draped over his shoulders like a cape. The man asked, "You okay, kid?" He crouched beside him. His voice was shaky as he took in the carnage. The smell of fuel was sharp in the air. "What the hell happened here?" The boy said. "I don't know." His tone was soft and uncertain. His eyes were wide as he stared at the wreckage. "My brother lost control. He couldn't steer, I guess, and hit that other car. I hit my head pretty hard and can't remember much after that." The man gave him a quick once-over. His hands hovered and checked for blood or broken bones. He found nothing but a calm, unscathed kid in the chaos. He said, "I'll call an ambulance to get you some help." He fumbled in his coat for his phone. His fingers were stiff from the cold. The kid replied, "No need." His voice was sharper now and cut through the wind. "Doctors don't help the dead. There's no point in that." The man blinked at those words. Confusion creased his face. He insisted anyway, stubborn and rattled. "I'm calling anyway. Someone might have made it through this. I've gotta try, right?" He pulled out his phone. His hands trembled as he punched in 911. He tapped the screen frantically. His breath puffed out in quick bursts. The kid smiled. It was a slow, quiet curve of his lips. His eyes glinted in the dark, under the faint glow of the pickup's headlights. He said, "You're the only one alive here." His voice was low, almost a whisper. The words hung heavy in the frigid air. The smile seemed to promise, not for long. The wind howled around them. It carried the scent of blood and snow into the night.